All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. Again, I think I'd warned everybody this is going to be a shorter grooming than normal, but we want to keep the time. So we've got a pretty set list for today. We're going to cover wish list. We've got a couple small ones on, I believe, a carousel as well, and maybe some tutorials as well. But again, just we'll watch the time. But again, want everybody's feedback on what actually is going to be post MVP work, right? And so we talk a lot about a wish list. We talk a lot about ratings and others. But now is a great time for folks to get started, especially if you have the cycles to help get ahead on this on these key experiences that won't be there for this month, but will certainly be there shortly afterwards as we continue to release out to the public. So, real quick, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, welcome to Grooming. So today we're going to cover again wish list. We're going to cover ratings, and then we're also going to maybe delve into either carousel or tutorials. Time remaining. And so on this one, so again with wishlist, let's walk through this pretty quickly. I think for those who've been following quite a bit, the add to wishlist functionality has been there from the get-go. It's been a static action from the product details page. But again, based on where we wanted to hit for this month was something that we consciously deferred that we knew we could fast follow with. But I think in the interest of making this a very short, very straightforward story, one of the things in pre-grooming I thought would be a really great way to start would be to essentially perform the action, but then just validate it on the back end, right? You can actually start to see the wish list being created. Open source first. I think if we start to look at commerce and EE, it gets a little bit more complex, but let's keep this small and start to see what can happen on the front end and as it relates to the back end. And of course, that's going to pressure test the APIs in terms of what can be done when, see if that's possible with some of the new community GraphQL work, but ultimately create an experience that would then bring back the wish list here, hopefully in a couple weeks. Look at some level of validation, which is something to think about, letting you know that action has been performed. And then again, just for the sake of this being the first of several iterations, being able to verify those behind the scenes. In this case, our friend Veronica Costello, be able to see that and then be able to understand, yes, this had made that change. Future stories, of course, will include being able to go directly into my account, being able to see the wish list, being able to manage the wish list, and also share the wish list. But in the spirit of not only just, I think, making some forward progress, but also carving this up to a couple smaller stories, kind of one at a time, share being its own. Account will probably come later because we want to take a look at some more complicated product details scenarios after MVP, like bundled and virtual as well. We'll be able to add those kind of all in kind of one swoop, but look at this in very small pieces, which recently have gotten some good uptake on the community. If they're 1 or 2 pointers, in some cases we'll come back in the morning from Austin, they're done and checked in, and that's great. And so that's the spirit of this one. Again, super straightforward. There's really no UX additionally on this, but this is the kind of the scenario, and these are the assumptions. We have a question.
Yes. Do we want to concern ourselves at this point with kind of the visual treatment that's in the mock and the interaction that happens when somebody does tap or untap an item?
I would love that. I think for this one, and if we can get this done before that would be great. I think we would fast follow with the right experience. The way this works currently in Venya, you have to be authenticated, right? And so we'll assume that you're already authenticated in this, and this then gets you into a fairly different experience altogether, which I quite honestly, I think if given you the time, maybe in a future sprint, I would love to reevaluate that, because it's a bit unnerving to kind of go from this into an account experience altogether versus something that maybe, again, just thinking of other commerce experiences, a modal or something that's a little bit more self-contained versus going to something that is maybe a bit overwhelming for that. And so we should spend a lot more time, I think, thinking through that in more detail, but yeah. I'm open to suggestions, though.
Yeah, I have some ideas on non-account holder wish list, which we can talk through offline.
Cool. So, I mean, in the spirit of that, is there what kind of actions are you thinking of? So, if someone is to pick this up, playing this out, is there some experimentation, or just something they can take a look at?
Well, there is a mock-up, and depending on whoever picks this up, I can share that with them and kind of talk through what that looks like on the front end, like on the PD page, or if we want to add this to the category page, like on the thumbnail, being able to add to wish list. But we can talk through those details when we're ready.
Okay, perfect.
And I can go ahead and update the mock-up in the ticket.
Yes, please. Yeah, I did a placeholder one just to kind of get the the ball rolling. This one's really going to be more of a test of can this be done and what needs to be happen. It needs to happen. And again, part of the task could very well be to identify coverage in GraphQL or others as part of the process, which is absolutely fine. That's why I've kind of labeled this as discovery, right? Let's get started on this. Let's see how this goes, and then we're going to start to layer in, fairly quickly the right experience. So with that in mind, are there any questions, any comments on this one before we come together on an estimate? Fully well understood. Maybe I've made this so small. It's just incredibly well understood. So, all right. Well, very good. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at then in the estimates. So, who'd like to get us started on this one?
I don't know. That could be as simple as a 3, honestly.
Sorry, I was muted. So whether this is a question for you, I know that the people on the call perhaps cannot answer this, but these stories definitely are for future release, which means that that they will that they'll definitely be using GraphQL functionality that's not in the current release. So when you do the discovery, you've got to do it on 2.3 develop. And we don't really have this concept like fully articulated in our documentation. And I think we should. I think there should be a label for 2.3 develop or for 2.3.1 candidate or whatever. And I think that we need to provision cloud that is specifically for like Canary. And that's something we'll talk to them about. But for you guys, like at Bargreen, that there's like the one instance that you definitely work on that is 2.3.0 release. So you don't end up with GraphQL stuff that doesn't work, right? Right. And so do you also have access to or internally maintain an instance that is on the edge of 2.3 develop?
We used to. We could set up that Docker image again if we need to.
Yeah, that's the thing is that, we all kind of did away with it because we were like, we got a schema. But for this now, we now have to have a distinct notion of everyone should be able to switch between I'm working on stuff for the current branch or a hotfix for the current branch, and or I'm working on stuff for the edge version. Because if you look, 2.3 develop has way more GraphQL in it. It's super cool, actually. I mean, I don't know how much of it works, but the schema is much larger. So when you do discovery on this, that will lend itself very much to estimation. So I want to say because this is a relatively new workflow for all of us, I want to add a couple points to this story just on that basis alone. So I'm just throwing that out there. My estimation is close to Jimmy's. I would call it a 5 or an 8, depending.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
All right. 5 or 8? What are we thinking here?
Let's call it an 8. Let's be careful.
All right. Becoming less than that, that's good.
If that's the case, could we also just explicitly add in the tasks doing the kind of initial discovery for swapping versions?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's the only reason it would be an 8, but it would definitely be that kind of work. So we should note that.
All right. All right, I will put some placeholder in here under the tasks around the discovery there. You guys keep me honest and make the edits you need that you feel would be helpful for someone who's less familiar. So. Cool. Done and done. Sorry, my spelling is not awesome today. Cool. Any other questions or comments before we wrap this one up? All right. Sorted. We're going to mark this one to ready to start. Cool. Let's take a look at what kind of we're on the mindset of pushing the GraphQL coverage. I'm going to call a little bit of an audible here, and let's talk about ratings. This may be something that's still blocked to date. I want to stress this one as well with the fact that UX is still probably going to be in development on this one. We've had some initial thinking on the showing of ratings in the past, which I think is a good starting point. But I think where we hit a roadblock in the past was the availability of the API coverage initially, which I believe, and maybe there's someone on the call can help us, I believe is opened up with GraphQL recently. So I'm not entirely sure if that's the case. This opens up to new possibilities after MVP, right? Again, this one's discovery work to see what's possible. I think we take a look at something that is in flight that is, again, could be roughed out to be fairly close to what we see here on the category page, but then would be representative of live data. And so this would just be the presentation of that information and the usage of hopefully GraphQL if that's available. And then with that, we'll set up following stories on, of course, contributing to a rating and managing a rating, all of that, which I think are kind of nice to have once this has been established. But that's the spirit of this one. Again, taking something that we hit a bit of a block on the API before. There's been a lot of progress on GraphQL, and again, as a shopper, you want to be able to view product ratings. We think this is going to be a really important one. Fast following the MVP release, this is exposed on so many places. Categories is one example. We do have it, of course, and want to have it on product details and others. And again, prior to our discussion, we've got some assumptions here on part of this discovery is to determine that coverage, see which way it's going to go. I think there's the versioning piece around 2.3.0 and 2.3.0 plus where it makes sense, and then the detailed pieces as well. And so that's that. And so that's we're part of this is just going to understand where this is and to provide a summary. But if we can get fairly far in it, just a proof of concept of where this is, and then we'll evolve that in parallel to as we get deeper into refining ratings, testing it, and then again beginning to get into the contributor part of the editorial part of ratings as a whole. So that is that. Does this make sense? Any questions or comments on this one? I'm going to add a few things based on the previous story here, but I definitely want to start a discussion on this. Yeah.
I think that it's worth mentioning that depending on the rating service used, there may be data in the Magento backend, which is how we use like Bizarre Voice and other rating systems today. But our architecture enables perhaps the integration of a service in a lighter way. I mean, when you sort by rating, I think probably Magento needs to have that information. So we probably shouldn't mess with it. But just the fact remains that any ratings third party that handles review stuff, if they have a GraphQL API, we can sort of stitch those schemas and navigate them as a single thing. Maybe that's a little premature to talk about again because of the sorting issue, but yeah. So let's actually do this. Since I mentioned it, let's go ahead and say that that's out of scope because we don't know how that would interoperate with our sorting and filtering.
Is that fair? GraphQL stitching is out of scope. I know you've talked about that a bit lately, but just to be super clear about it.
Yeah, well, specifically what's out of scope is configuring the application or upward to directly interact with the API from the reviews provider, and instead trying to reuse the data from Magento and how it currently stores reviews. That's what's in scope.
Got it. Yeah, that would definitely be more than the first iteration for sure. So, but a cool idea. That's nonetheless. Okay, very good. Anything else on this one? Does this seem at least a good starting point for some discovery work? Any other questions or comments on this one before we get to estimates? All right, very good. Well, let's get to estimates, folks. It's again, we don't need to go spend too much time on this, but I do want to get a ballpark on this one. So we're where would we like to start the bidding for this? The one pointer?
No, I mean, I think this one looks more complicated to me than the last one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just discovery. It's not implementation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the output of the story, the deliverable for the story is just a description of what it's another story. It's a description of what implementation would entail.
Yeah, or just even a proof of concept. Here, this is what I was able to produce, but really here's the recommendation, and then follow-up stories that either may be in our backlog or even other backlogs as well.
Yeah, if a proof of concept is possible.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't make that a hard requirement for this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, then, in that case, it's probably not an actual 8, but I still think it's probably a 5.
I don't see Jimmy on video yet, so I'm trying to translate his facial reactions to points here. So 5,
You're not going to see me on video much at this hour.
Okay, very good.
Inscrutable is this guy's middle name. What do you think you're going to see in his face?
Oh. All right.
Yeah,
Feeling
I would
5.
start at a 5 unless someone can convince me that this is going to be easier than that.
I concur.
All right. Any objects? All right. Sold. Thank you, everybody. We'll move that over to ready to start. Again, this one's a little bit more ambiguous than others, but in the spirit of if folks can take a look at this in parallel to while we bring this home, I think this would be really good work for us. So ready to start, update, and sorted. Cool.
What do you have to lose? You don't even have to write code.
There you go. Hey, maybe even I could do this. No, not so much. So let's talk through. Let's see here. Dealer's choice, tutorials or the image indicator. Let's go through tutorials. So this one, I was reluctant to go on this one, but what I like about this is the spirit of what we're trying to do around MVP. And so talking to Mr. Kalkabin on this one, we've got a lot of documentation ahead of us as we look to enable and get ready for the MVP. And so this will be a bit of a non-traditional grooming, but I want to get the input from this group here on what would be a useful set of tutorials going into some of the how-to around the studio. And so by all stretches of the data that we're seeing on pwastudio.io, setting up the Venia storefront is the number one. It's if you're looking at a heat map, it looks like everybody's just looking right at that, and then they're going through the rest as they learn. But if you compare this to other content that we do, and make available for free, let's say like on Magento U, where you're kind of going through step-by-step instructions. Goal here is not to replace that by any means, but as people become more and more familiar with the studio and they've got setup and configuration ready to go, what is the spirit of using the canonical hello world example to make a small edit to feel confident about both the editing experience, the beginnings of a build experience, how that kind of works, and feel like they've got a handle that they could either create more pages, make some modifications to an existing one, and begin starting to use this. And so that's the spirit of this one. This alone is likely an epic in its own right, but I wanted to use this, especially with this audience here, as a means to talk through and maybe even prioritize a discussion on what might be important here. And I think as we look at this, we would then turn this into either individual stories or make this a reasonable story that James can take a look at with the team's input to start looking at what some of that basic content might be. So again, it's very topical in terms of our last strides here towards MVP. We are of course partnering with Magento U and others on this, but I think it would be irresponsible for us not to have at least an example or two on how to make some basic changes here based on all the great overview content we've got, some of the architectural work we've got, and then of course setup and configuration. So that's that. So this one is, again, beginnings of discussion. Let me just kind of read you through some initial thoughts here based on existing materials. And so I think we can link to the overview of PWA, which exists. I do want to link out to relevant developer tools where it makes sense on things like Lighthouse and others. We do a good job of that and kind of showing what the browser's capable of in the front-end training. Webpack, I think we can curate what might be relevant for people to learn about Webpack. Same could probably be said about React. A basic exercise. So Zetlin has done some small color changes, some image changes in the past in demos. That's a nice way to at least start to feel comfortable where somebody can make a change and update the build and see how that goes. Build and deploy updates that might be a result of that. And then, of course, again, just linking to related content. We're not reinventing a lot here. We're packaging and curating that. And so I think this, if you look at this as one place where we can link to other places that still allow you to create your first or make your first change to Venya, this would be a great piece. And so your assumptions, of course, that hopefully you know what PWA is, what and when, and how that works, some basic knowledge of front-end technologies. We're not going to teach you React here. We might give you a good link or two to get started in this, and of course, some working knowledge of Magento too. And I say that based on the dependencies and the understandings that you'll want to have around how the APIs work. At the very least, maybe linking to some of the new REST API and GraphQL documentation that's out there as people start to work with it. And just one task: testing and documentation. So that's that. So what is So with that in mind, I'd like to time box this, but I want to discuss what are our thoughts on what we think might be the most valuable starter or kind of how-to content for this, and then we can refine this as a team.
I can't help but think about the deltas in project setup that I want to close, but so I'm just going to say them and then try to put them aside. One certainly is that we need proper scaffolding rather than, hey, clone the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I know that, we have to have a discovery story for that. That's not 2.3, but it's hard for me to conceive of a reasonable guide that starts with clone this giant Git repository. So we need to have scaffolding. And secondly, this is more of a quality thing. We need to do some serious quality work on our developer modes, hot module reload experience, because out of the box, there's a lot that works great. We've done some weird stuff, and so we need maybe to write the code that makes hot module replacement sort of maximally good. Like we need discovery on adding React hot loader, on making sure that the GraphQL does HMR, etc. So those are just two stories. But separately from that, I would say that the very first developer tutorial thing that we would want would be to introduce the Magento developer, who, let's face it, they're going to be the primary audience for this initially, rather than just your generic front-end developer. It's going to be your full-stack Magento developer. I think we need to introduce the Magento developer to NPM as a manager for a project, in the same way that in 2.3 we did so much work to introduce Composer as the dep manager for Magento. The big difference is that when we introduced Composer, we used only the package installation aspect of Composer, nothing else. In cloud, we're starting to use other things, but we use nothing else. NPM, we're using scripts, and we're sort of running our package life cycles through that, and we're using Lerna. So I would say the first thing to do is to introduce, here's what to do with an NPM project. Here's what happens when you install ours. Here's the sort of the life cycle of it. And when you are in working mode, do everything from the root, run these scripts. This is what they're doing, etc.
That's fair. I have a quick question. Eric, are you intending this to be someone takes on this story and begins documentation more or less from scratch? Or are we saying take some kind of existing documentation written by Calcoben and modify it? What's the line there?
Someone give me some notes and I'll create documentation from those notes.
Yeah, I think it'd be something
if someone else were to take.
I can't really
it would
hear
be something
you.
that Calcoben would take. I think the benefit of grooming here is that I think it would help us highlight the things that are most important. But yeah, this is something that Calcoben would take and run with based on the collective wisdom of the group here.
I see. Okay.
But not to replace or duplicate what we currently have. So.
Gotcha. I mean, it seems to me that this is the kind of thing that'd be great if we could get if this was an effort that multiple different people could chip into rather than just one person owning personally. Because having a mixture of input here from folks who are more like Zetlin and myself, who have a lot of experience with all these technologies, but just want to talk about the idiosyncrasies of this project versus, I see we have Carl Hass on the project who's diving into not only all this but also React, and so people like that will have a completely different perspective on stuff that would definitely need to be in this kind of guide.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we should turn this into an epic and kind of put stuff under it.
Agreed.
These individual little specific.
Yep. Well, that makes sense. Well, I'll tell you, I do apologize. We're a bit short on time today. We only had half an hour for today's grooming, but what I want to do is for everyone to kind of write down some homework and kind of think about this afterwards for next week's grooming, right? And so think about what a tutorial experience might be for you, for your customers, for your teams. For that, I'll start this off as a epic. This by no means is complete, but then maybe next week we can start to take a look at some stories that fall into this that we can start to sequence and start to look at for everything else. And so. How does that sound? Perfect. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it. Again, apologies again. That was a bit shorter than usual, but as always appreciate your time, your perspective, your estimates, of course, and all of your energy for this project. We're in the home stretch for the MVP, and we could not be where we are without you. And so, as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, let us know. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend. Okay.
Everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.